Everybody, welcome to this episode of Dev Tool Time. This is the show where we really just want to give you, the developers, something interesting to learn about, something that we think you need to know about. So just to be clear, this is not a show at all about CockroachDB. If you're interested in learning more about CockroachDB, we can give you some suggestions for what to watch. But today, we're very excited. We're being joined by Warp. We're being joined by the CEO of Warp. We have Aloke, who's an engineer at Warp, and then alongside me, I have Rafi Shamim from Cockroach Labs. Rafi, why don't you introduce yourself really quick, and then we'll get into our featured guest today.
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Rafi. So I'm an engineer at Cockroach Labs. I work on the SQL experience team here. So yeah, a lot of my work is about making sure that CockroachDB works well with tools that developers use to build applications. Specifically through the SQL interface. So yeah, I've been working on that, and I'm excited to learn about any tools that developers use. So super excited to learn about Warp.
Thank you, Rafi. Alok, why don't you go ahead, and then I've got some special questions for Zach.
Sure, sounds good. Hey, my name's Aloke. I'm an engineer at Warp. I've been here for almost a year now. And before that, I was working on Google Docs for about 4 years. And that's how I got connected to Zach.
Very cool. Yeah, I saw the Google Docs sort of pedigree across a bunch of your engineers. So I do have some questions about how Google Docs has sort of influenced what you all are creating. Zach, you are the CEO. You're the founder of Warp. I was trying to get a little good-natured dirt on you ahead of this interview. So I asked a few people, and what kept coming up was your affection for Benihanas. Can you elaborate?
Yeah.
What is it about Benihanas that you adore?
I started going to Benihana when I was like 6 every birthday, and I still go. It's a little different experience now, but yeah, I like the whole thing. I like the onion volcano. I like wearing the hat. Great.
Yeah, the onion volcano gets me every time.
How good are you at catching fried food in your mouth?
Shrimp in my pocket. I'm decent.
So I was reading a little bit about your bio. So Zach, you came from Google Docs. You spent some time at Time, it looked like, as well. That was a little redundant question. Can you tell us about your origins, where you came from, how you came to be the CEO of Warp?
Sure. So I was an engineer at Google in New York for about 8 years. Most of my time there, I was the engineering lead on Google Sheets, and I managed that team and built a lot of the current version of that product. Then I left Google about 6 years ago. At that time, I was a principal engineer running engineering on the Google Docs suite. I knew I wanted to sort of experiment with starting companies. I co-founded a company called Selfmade, which still exists, but is in a very, very different space than the developer space. It's now like a marketing automation company. And then I had a brief detour where I was sort of consulting as the CTO at Time Magazine while I was figuring out what I wanted to do next. And I just got very excited about the idea of working on something that was more similar to what I did at Google Docs, but for developers, and really trying to build just a better productivity experience. And so that's sort of how I ended up getting to Warp.
Very cool. Did you overlap with any of our founders, Spencer, Peter, Ben at Google?
I did. Yeah, I know Spencer and Peter from Google.
Very cool. That's great. So we're going to get into we want to see a demo of Warp. We want to ask some sort of questions about the developer experience. Before we get there, can you tell us what is the origin of Warp? Do you remember a moment when you realized this was going to be the company that you wanted to build?
Yeah. So like I said, I was interested in developer productivity, and specifically I was interested in, is there a way just of improving the UX around tools that developers frequently use. I feel like developers often build these tools for themselves, and the sort of product design accessibility and usability on a lot of them could be better. One of them, like the tool that I think is like glaringly kind of bad and has the most obvious room for improvement is the terminal. So I was drawn to it just from like the perspective of like, hey, there's a very big delta between the way this tool works today and the way that it could potentially work if you were to like really dedicate resources and try to build the best possible version of it. And then the other thing that I thought was really appealing about working on the terminal was that it's a very widely used tool. So if you could, build something that is better there, it has a chance to impact the lives of, pretty much every developer. I think most developers are using the terminal every day, one way or another, whether they want to or not. And so I was looking for opportunities to do something with a pretty big impact. And, the more I started thinking about the terminal, I was like, what if it worked like this? What if it worked like that? And I just got excited about like, imagining how the thing could work if we were, really trying to build it the right way.
How did Google Docs influence, how you were thinking about reinventing the terminal?
The obvious killer feature for Google Docs is like real-time collaboration and cloud accessibility. I think those things are useful for the terminal, but it actually isn't like, I don't think it's the right place to start when you're thinking about building a better terminal. I think the right place to start is just like meet developers where they are, which is like the terminal is a native app that needs access to their local file system, because that's how developers work today. They like clone a repo, bring it down to their local file system, and then they want a tool that works, very effectively for their current use cases. And so that's like what we're starting with. Now, Google Docs had some similar challenges in the sense that when you try to build something like to replace a tool that people are really comfortable using, and for Google Docs, it was like Microsoft Office, you have a pretty high bar in terms of functionality that you need to hit before people can comfortably use it. And so some of the challenges that we had there in terms of like, how do you prioritize doing something new versus how do you prioritize just like, bringing in functionality that people expect is very relevant to what we're doing at Warp.
Very cool. I'm excited to get to the demo. One other question was, where is Warp right now in its evolution as a company? Like when did you found the company and how far along are you?
Yeah, so the company officially started in June of 2020 in the first few months of the pandemic, which was kind of crazy.
That was crazy.
The first person who joined me as the founding designer is CQ, who I worked with at Google. He used to run the UX team for Google Docs. The two of us started, and then we started building a team, and like shortly thereafter, we hired some awesome engineers to join us. And where we're at, like over the past year, we sort of figured out how we wanted to build it. And I think there's interesting technology that's worth talking about. We have built something around like, I would say like around the New Year's, we had something that was good enough for us to start using internally as like a daily driver. And then we kind of came out of stealth, so to speak, like a little over a month ago, and have been slowly letting people off of a sort of list of people, like a wait list basically, into a private beta. And where we're at right now is really just trying to work with our first, few hundred users and try to get feedback, take that feedback and make the app, work for all of their daily use cases and get them to a point where it's like far and away the tool they want to use most. And so we're in that stage of iterating right now.
That's really cool. I've meant to say this at the top. So Peter Mattis, I think one of our founders, was given maybe 20 invitations that he could extend. And when he put it into our company Slack, he was like, just raise a hand if you're interested. And it was like immediate. There were like 30 people that wanted access immediately. So clearly you've tapped into something that people want, that people care about, that is, has a lot of value. Like you said, this is something they're interacting with constantly. So
Yeah.
why shouldn't it be great? Why shouldn't it be better than how it is now? If you'd like, Zach, you can share screen now, and we'll just hop in. Let's take a look. Let's take it for a drive, and Rafi and I can ask questions while you're cruising through.
Sure.
Let me know when you have that popped up, and I can queue up your screen here.
Yeah. Do you guys see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. All good.
Okay. We're looking at Warp. I guess the first thing I would point out is that Warp is a terminal, so it's not a thing that sort of sits on top of your terminal, or it's not a thing that you're meant to use like in addition to your normal terminal. The goal here is that developers would want to adopt this in place of like iTerm or the terminal app. It's Mac only right now, so this is running on my Mac. And let me give you just a quick tour of like what's different about it from your standard terminal. So kind of one thing you'll notice immediately is that when I run a command in Warp, what happens is the output and the input are grouped together. And the feature that we call blocks, the idea here is that in a traditional terminal, it's all just kind of like one big buffer of text, and that makes it hard to sort of understand the structure of one of your sessions, and it makes it hard to do things with commands that you've already executed. In Warp, you can navigate on a block by block basis, which is super convenient. And then since we know what's what, you also get the opportunity to take actions on blocks. And so we just have a pretty basic set of actions right now, but they're actually very useful. So for instance, like you can copy paste exactly what you want. If you want the command, if you want its output, if you want both, if you want to rerun it, you can do that. If you want to share it, and this is kind of our first like collaborative feature, what will happen here is you can get a permalink, which if I were to open this up in a browser, you would basically see the same rendering. And the use case here is like you want feedback on a thing from someone on your team, or you want to record in a wiki like something that you did in the terminal and have it there for posterity. And feel free to hop in if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep going here.
I was going to say that seems really useful because the number of times where like I'm trying to help someone and they say the command failed, and like you never know what the full command is until you ask a second time. So sharing it up front.
Sharing it is nice. I mean, it's better than a screenshot too, in the sense that you have all the text and all the context. You can copy it and actually use it. Cool. So a second thing that's very different in Warp than in your standard terminal is this the input area at the bottom here. In Warp, the input is like an actual text editor, so it's much more common to what you would have in like VS Code or Sublime or something like that. And so I'm just going to type some gibberish, but you can, one thing you can do, and this is going to seem like it's silly to even point this out, but in Warp you can like click and put the cursor someplace, and in like a normal terminal you can't do that, which is nuts. It's like a crazy experience for someone who's new to development to not have that work. You can double click and it will select something. You can do select all, and it'll select all and let you delete. If you do something with multi lines, you can go back and edit on the line before, and like that often doesn't work for people correctly in their terminals. And so the basic stuff just works much better. And then there's also having this input editor opens the door to doing much fancier, cool stuff. So, like for instance, like I'll find some command that I did in the past, like this crazy gcloud command here, and like in Warp, what you can do, I don't know if you guys can see this, is like it will find all the instances of this word in here, terminal, and then I can say if I want to change the name of terminal, I can change it all at once. So I don't know if you guys are seeing this, but I'm typing in multiple places all at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's a feature also that you would get in a lot of IDEs right now. It has not been present in the command line ever.
Does that
Zach, let me. Oh, go ahead,
sorry.
Rafi.
I was just curious. Like, are the key bindings for that like I'm guessing they're configurable, but is there like a Vim like mode or something like that?
So they will be configurable. That's like we're beta. I want to emphasize that. But yes, this will all be configurable just because developers come into this with different kinds of muscle memory, and yeah, that's one thing that we'll definitely will have. But we don't really have much customization yet.
Zach, when I was reading about some of your differentiators, and obviously collaboration was one of the big ones that stood out. But it seems like ease of use is a big part of this as well. Like you're sort of taking away some of the blockers and just streamlining them.
Yeah, our beta app is really all focused on. I guess I would say it's all focused on speed is the main thing. We focus on speed, in terms of how we built the thing. I can talk about that in a minute. But also just like speed in terms of accomplishing tasks. So it's like we're trying to make it easier to do things faster in the terminal. And I think a bunch of that has to do with accessibility as well. It's like doing something easily kind of translates to doing it faster. But yeah, most of our features right now have absolutely nothing to do with collaboration, and they're all just about like what's the best. It's like we're trying to build what is the best single user terminal experience that someone could possibly have, and then I think as users get accustomed to that, we'll focus more on like features where it's like we're leveraging the fact that there's a cloud behind this, and then you can collaborate with the team. But to start, it's really all about accessibility.
What is some of the feedback that you're getting from your beta users?
So the feedback is it's generally that people really they love the blocks. They like the intuitiveness of the input. They like the look and feel. Like I think we've designed a very like pretty app. It's something that makes our users more productive. As far as like feedback about things we need to fix, like a lot of it is it's kind of like because we're beta, we're missing things that people are accustomed to. So for instance, we don't support split panes yet. And it's just a very basic feature that you'll find in other terminals. It's like you want two terminal windows side by side, you kind of have to open a whole new window in Warp right now. There's no reason we like can't build that. We're just like trying to build things as fast as we can and haven't built it yet. So there's that. There's customizations are super important for developers. So like you mentioned earlier, the ability to customize your key bindings is really important. We haven't done that yet. Customizing the look and feel of the terminal. Like I think we have a nice looking default, but the terminal is kind of it's a very personal tool for people, and they want to be able to set their own colors and their own theme, or at least choose something that is not like our default one. We're working on that right now. Yeah, and then it's just like it's kind of beta software, so we have random bugs and crashes and stuff. But generally, I would say like the people, we have quite a few people who are using it as their daily terminal now, and like I think some of the innovations that we've done are people really like them. It's cool.
Kind of related to the customization plans you're mentioning, but I guess I'm just a little bit curious about the internals. Like, so
yeah.
Does this terminal sort of like work with any shell? Like a lot of people use Bash or ZSH, or does it sort of have its own shell, and does it take care of that abstraction?
That's a great question. So I can let Aloke speak to this a little bit, but like the basic architecture is that Warp is a terminal and it runs your shell. So if you're used to using ZSH, you're used to using Bash, Warp supports both of those shells. We have sort of work in progress support on Fish as well. And the way that we sort of get to this terminal app that's significantly different than the normal one is by configuring the shells to work with Warp. we do take over though some of the stuff that you would traditionally, like a shell would traditionally do, like completions, which I guess I haven't showed you yet. But for instance, like when I do this, you can see we have native completions here where it's like we actually parse your input, figure out where in the input you are, figure out what command or subcommand comes next, and then show you help as you go. This is something that shells will sort of do for you that we've taken over. And I think, eventually we would like to push more and more towards vertical integration, but there's actually good reasons not to start with that as far as like helping developers get into Warp. And then there's like some technical challenges around, like, I think SSH is the biggest one, where if you're going to a remote machine, we don't want to have a requirement right now that someone installs some other shell on that remote machine to work with Warp. Look, anything you would add to that?
Like I think you can think of. I think the main thing is like we've tried to just meet developers where they are as much as possible when trying to build this. Like, I think at some point we may think about building our own shell, but I don't think we want to start there. Like, we can interface enough with the shell to like determine to build most of these features, like to know when a command ends and when it starts. So there's nothing really stopping us from building this for or expanding this for really any other shell that we don't support currently.
Alok, what was your preferred terminal before Warp?
I was using iTerm with an awful theme and with this transparent background that drove Zach crazy when I first started. And to be honest, I didn't really think much of it. I was just kind of using mostly the defaults, like with OhmyZSH, and hadn't really tried to push it much further. I think what appealed to me so much about Warp is I'm very much, I think, in the type of engineer who got to using the terminal shell to make it good enough, but to never spend the time to learn all the crazy shortcuts or to use something like tmux or vim to really push it to its boundaries. And what working at Warp was so exciting is to have more sensible defaults and have a great out of the box experience, so I didn't have to spend the time doing that.
When Zach brought this or introduced this idea to you, or maybe asked you to join the team, what was the thing about Warp that you were like, okay, yeah, I need to be a part of that. I'm excited about that.
I think for me the big thing was as soon as I saw the mocks, which honestly weren't that far off from I think what we have here. It was kind of a moment of, oh my God, how has no one built this before? And having that feeling, I think, especially in 2021, is kind of a unique thing. It's often I feel like you see companies starting that are so niche, and to me, this felt like this is this thing that really hasn't changed since 40 years ago, and I had never thought about it until I saw these mocks, and to me, that felt really exciting.
Very cool. Zach, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. You were cruising along.
What was I doing? I guess I at some point I stopped in the demo. I could just kind of pick that up for a little bit if that's helpful, or if you guys want to talk more about how we built it. But just a couple other features to just wrap up the demo. So one other thing that I didn't show that we have is the ability to sort of navigate the whole terminal using this command palette. And the idea here, again, if you use VS Code or something similar, you've seen an interface like this. It's to help people learn how to use the keyboard to do things faster in the terminal. So we have that feature. And then we have one other feature, which I sort of quickly showed, which is kind of a visual history search, which, again, it's more in the realm of this is a nice UI to have. It's not this isn't like a cloud back history or anything like that. But in terms of starting with things that make developers' lives nicer and easier right now, that's kind of I think I've shown you a lot of what we've done so far.
Very cool. What is, when you're talking to developers, what is the one thing that is super important for you to convey to them about Warp? What's the most important thing they need to know?
I think it's a great question. So there's one very specific answer to this, is that this app is totally native. Like often when people build developer tools these days, they build them using web tech plus Electron, and you end up with a very like heavy, kind of slow, memory intensive, big binary type thing. I think, Warp, when we came out of stealth, one of the things that got us a lot of excitement is that we built this completely in Rust. So it's a completely native Rust app, and it's all GPU accelerated. So it's a very, very fast app. And I think for this tool in particular, I guess in developer tools in general, speed is the thing that developers really care about. And just that we're taking a real sort of first principles approach here to building the fastest, most usable terminal. And like our goal is really just to keep building this product until there's a version of the command line terminal that is like as awesome as it possibly could be. It's going to take some time because it's actually like a pretty big, complicated thing to try to like supplant in a developer's life. So, we'll need a little bit of patience from people as we sort of push it forward. But our goal really is to build an amazing product here.
Yeah, you mentioned having built it in Rust, and we got this question from the audience here about that choice. I think at Cockroach, in the early days, there was a debate about whether to build with Go or Rust. How do you feel about the decision to use Rust?
I feel fantastic about the decision to use Rust. I mean, we prototyped in WebTech, and Google Docs is all built in WebTech. And like one of the, to answer this in a little bit of a roundabout way, like one of the things that I feel like we never quite could figure out on Google Docs was how to make it feel like a native app and have that kind of performance and have that kind of scale. And it wasn't for lack of trying. There were a lot of really great engineers working on just like tuning every single part of like our spreadsheet app to get as much performance out of it as we could. But at the end of the day, the platform that we were building on, like JavaScript in a browser, you just sort of hit limits in your ability to control things. Like you could never control the garbage collector. It was really hard to control memory allocations and that type of thing. And what's nice about Rust is that we feel like we're starting on the platform where we can build something that's like lightning fast, the best possible app. And it's still like a pretty nice programming language. I mean, there's definitely a learning curve. You have to think about memory more than you do in like, garbage collected language. But I don't think I think once you get past the learning curve, I think it's actually a language that's pretty easy to be efficient in, and that has a great community, and that a lot of like really strong developers are interested in working in, which is a great thing for us as we're trying to grow the team and hire awesome engineers. So I feel great about it.
Great.
Yeah, it also seems to me like the Rust community is just really excited to try new tools. So I'm sure a lot of the users you could see might be using Rust as well.
Absolutely.
We got another question here from the audience about what are the high priority features you guys are working on? And you did touch on a couple of these as we were going along. There's another question about where people can track the progress.
Yeah, so we have a GitHub issues board. It's our GitHub org is warp.dev, warp.dev. And under the public Warp repo, if you go to the issues there, you can see what features we've filed and what features people in our Discord community are voting on. We have a Discord which is like fairly active, where we try to get feedback, interact with our not customers at this point, users, I should say. So that's like how we're tracking it, GitHub and Discord. The specific things that we're focused on right now are theming, are making our completion system really, really great. It's like good, but has some holes in it. And then figuring out, broadly speaking, like session management and pane splitting, and like trying to address some of the use cases that people use split panes and tmux for. That's like the super near term.
Cool. You mentioned, customers, users. What is the future? What is like the business model? And
great
too early
question
to figure that out.
So the terminal is traditionally is a free tool, and Warp is a free tool. So we're going to market as a free tool, and I never imagine us charging for people to use the sort of basic terminal functionality that they get in like iTerm or the terminal app. Our goal is that we can build something that's valuable enough with features that don't exist in the terminal today. So for example, like real-time collaboration, or an infinite history, or auditing. If you're a company and you want to see a replay of what happened during a firefight, can you pull that information from terminals? Those types of enterprise features are things that we would try to build a business around. And it would be, our main customer would be businesses, not so much individual developers. Although, it's like a freemium model essentially, if you want to think of it like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. Cockroach is a cloud native database. I think having a cloud native terminal is like a really compelling thing to think about. I like that a lot.
Cool.
There's another question here about the specific UI framework being used.
I can take this one.
Yeah, take this one on. Yeah.
We actually have our own UI framework we built in-house. We partnered with Nathan Sobo, who's the founder of the Atom text editor, to build it. The reason we ended up going native is there are a few UI frameworks in Rust, but they're not like fully full-fledged just yet, and they don't support GPU rendering in the way we wanted to. We wanted to use Metal just so we could have kind of the best debugging experience on Mac. And so we ended up just going the full native route. And I think that's actually been really advantageous for us. Just because we kind of control the stack end to end. We've been able to do this all in Metal. And we do plan on open sourcing it at some point. We kind of want to make it a little more cross-platform and get the abstractions for making this cross-platform right. But I think this is going to be a very valuable thing for the entire Rust community once we do open source it.
Actually, one thing about UI. Again, to get more into the technical side, you mentioned that it's like it uses GPU acceleration, and that's pretty interesting to me. Like, I guess I just wouldn't have expected this because we're dealing with textual data. So I guess like I don't really know much about GPU programming. So could you say a little bit about like why that helps and how you do that?
Yeah. So when running commands, so I feel like most terminals now end up doing GPU rendering. So if you think of iTerm, terminal app, and even some like more like less common terminals like Hyper, which is WebTech, also has like a GPU rendered piece. And the reason they do GPU rendering is you can have commands such as catting a large file where there's so much text on the screen that to hit 60 FPS or even more, depending on your monitor, you're really limited if you try to do that on the CPU. So the advantage of going to the GPU is you're kind of unbounded by some of those constraints. And obviously it's much harder to program, especially if we have our own UI framework, right? So from text file to pixel, we own the entire stack there. But you can really push the boundaries. So like for us, for our FPS is easily like 200 FPS plus. And like it doesn't end up being like a bottleneck is the actual CPU rendering or like text rendering piece.
Yeah.
Cool. You mentioned, Aloke, that building the framework from scratch gave you more control. That sort of reminded me of this question I wanted to ask about, like, do you have overarching engineering philosophies or like principles that you follow as a team?
I think Zach, do you want to talk about the ZBook?
Yeah, I mean, kind of plug my blog here. I have written a sort of handbook on my thoughts on sort of engineering best practices. That's at thezbook.com. I don't know why I'm plugging it, but if it does give a detailed version of how I think of this. I'd say we're really pragmatic. We emphasize that a lot. So it's like the ZBook. I couldn't get zbook.com. Zbook.com. Yeah, so we're very pragmatic, and so there we go. Plug alert, thezbook.com. At the end of the day, we're trying to balance a bunch of different things. The one principle that I think we always will come back to is like what's going to be best for the user. That's like the one thing that I really don't want to compromise on. So generally, when we're building something, we start with like what is the what's the ideal user experience that we're trying to get to, and then we, within reason, work backwards technically to figure out what's it going to take to do that. With regards to the UI framework and controlling the full stack, I guess this is kind of like a thing that I felt pretty strongly on leaving Google, was that I felt like we were always fighting the stack. And so I don't like to be boxed in by a particular technology. So for instance, like in the cloud world, the analogy would be like, I wouldn't use like a platform as a service or something like that. If I was trying to build like an app that I really wanted to scale, I'd want to be able to sort of control the individual server pieces. For like the thing that we're doing right now, it's like, it is more engineering work up front to get the app out of the door. But I also feel like in a sense, there's less technical risk because I know that we'll never be stuck on some not having control over how we fix a problem.
Yeah, you're touching on something that's super relatable, which is like building for scale from the start versus like kicking scale down the road and being like, hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Was that a hard decision for you, an easy decision?
I mean, we prototyped this in Electron to sort of get a sense of like what that might be like. But I think we saw pretty quickly that we were just going to be hitting walls, and we switched directions. That's a tough one. I think it depends how confident you are in the thing that you're building. Like if you in a startup sense, if you don't know if you're building the right product, there's a big advantage to building on something where the velocity of building is higher. If you're more confident in the thing you're trying to build, then I think that there's more value in trying to get it kind of right. And I don't know, for Warp, we sort of, I guess, rolled the dice a little, and we're like, bet on the product vision being good. And we're just like, if we go with the solution that might be like a little bit faster to go to market, I thought ultimately we're going to end up with a worse product and like with scaling issues. And like, so we sort of took the upfront cost and bet on that. But it's going to be different depending on what situation you're in.
Yeah, I like that distinction that you made. If you're confident, then you build for scale. If you're sort of not sure yet, then you build for velocity. I haven't heard it said quite like that, but that's great. So you've both been very generous with your time. You have a terminal to go build. So I do want to be respectful of where you need to be. One last question. What's the best way for people to get started, programmers that are interested in giving Warp a try? Where should they go?
So right now, I think that there's a couple of things. So one, you could go to our website and request early access. I would appreciate if people did that. But I'm also happy for people to just sort of join our Discord community, which is also linked to on the website, introduce themselves there. And we're giving out invites and access codes and letting people in pretty frequently. Those are the best things for people to do.
Okay, perfect. Well, Aloke, Zach, thank you both so much for joining us. This is really, I didn't want to sound biased at the start, but I checked around for the feedback internally, and people are excited.
Cool.
People really like what they see, and there's some buzz building, particularly internally with engineers at Cockroach. So you're doing great work. We'll keep an eye on you. We're excited to see where this goes, and maybe you come back on the stream, when you want to share a new release or some new functionalities.
That'd be great. Thank you so much for having us on. This was fun.
Of course. Yeah.
This was awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Bye-bye.